Hello everyone, welcome back to our YouTube channel AgriAddict. As of now, we are providing online courses for 4 major subject groups including plant science, physical science, agronomy and entomology, and complete mock test bundle for 6 major subject groups including plant science, physical science, agronomy, entomology, horticulture as well as social sciences, which will be really helpful for your competitive examinations preparations including ICAR, JRF, SRF, CUET, IBPS and other agriculture related examinations. I'll be dealing with social sciences and I am Ajay Antosoi. I did my UG from College of Agriculture, Padanakkad, Kerala Agricultural University, and I did my masters in the subject of agricultural economics from College of Agriculture, Rajendra Nagar, PJT, SAU, Hyderabad. And currently I am pursuing my PhD in the same subject in Indian Agriculture Research Institute, New Delhi. In the year of 2021, I have secured All India rank 27th in the ICAR JRF examination, and in the year of 2023, I have secured All India rank 4th in the ICAR SRF examination, and in the same year, I have qualified ASRB net also. So today we will be dealing with two important concepts of consumer behavior, that is consumer surplus and indifference curve analysis. As we have already discussed, there are two main approaches in analyzing the consumer behavior. First one is cardinal approach and second one is ordinal approach. In cardinal approach, two main important concepts we have already discussed in the previous video. First one is law of diminishing marginal utility and the second one is law of equimarginal utility. So the third one in the consumer surplus, in the cardinal utility is consumer surplus, and in the ordinal approach, a main technique is coming, that is indifference curve analysis. So therefore consumer surplus belong to the cardinal utility approach and indifference curve analysis comes under the ordinal utility approach. I hope you recall the distinguishing criteria between the cardinal approach and ordinal approach. The main difference between cardinal approach and ordinal approach is nothing but the measurability of the marginal utility, right? So in the cardinal approach, marginal utility can be measured in terms of money or in terms of utils, but in the case of indifference curve analysis, the utility cannot be measured in terms of money or in terms of utils. Instead we can just prefer one bundle over the another. For example, we have three commodities. First one is dairy milk, second one is Milky Bar, and third one will be Snickers. So if this is the cardinal utility approach, I will be expressing individual utility levels of these three commodities, right? Suppose I am having 10 utils from I'm getting satisfaction of 10 utils from dairy milk. I am getting a satisfaction of 5 utils from dairy Milky Bar and 2 utils from Snickers. Then I will be telling like I have maximum satisfaction from dairy milk, therefore I will be preferring dairy milk over Milky Bar and Milky Bar over Snickers. What happens in the ordinal utility approach? In realistical assumptions, we cannot measure our satisfaction levels, right? Therefore, in ordinal utility approach, we are just expressing our preferences. I'll be just telling like I'll be preferring dairy milk over Milky Bar, and my preference of Milky Bar will be over Snickers, and obviously the preference of dairy milk will be higher than that of Snickers. So this is happening in the ordinal utility analysis, or even in the indifference curve approach. Therefore, remember that consumer surplus, law of diminishing marginal utility and law of equimarginal utility comes under consumer surplus, and or indifference curve analysis comes under this ordinal utility approach. So what is consumer surplus? As we all know, the concept of consumer surplus was introduced by Alfred Marshall. Remember, Alfred Marshall was the propounder of welfare definition, and he was also the proposer of this law of diminishing marginal utility and also law of equimarginal utility, and another important concept that we are going to study in the next classes, that is elasticity of demand. Elasticity of demand was also propounded by Alfred Marshall. So relate the concepts with the propounder. So what is consumer surplus? In the technical definition goes like this: the difference between the amount of money that the consumer actually pays for buying certain quantity of commodity and the amount he or she would be willing to pay for the same quantity rather than going without it. We will be explaining this concept with a simple example. Suppose I am having higher cravings for eating mango, so I will be going to market and I am planning to purchase 1 kg of mango. Okay, 1 kg of mango, and because of my higher cravings, I am planning to spend 100 rupees. I am ready to purchase 1 kg of mango at 100 rupees. So I am willing to pay 100 rupees. But when I went to the market, I came to realize that the market price is just 80 rupees per kg of mango. So I was willing to pay 100 rupees, and for 1 kg of mango, I had to pay only 80 rupees. So 20 rupees extra I was ready to pay to grab this 1 kg of mango, right? So that difference can be considered as consumer surplus. I hope you got the point. So again we are discussing the definition, that is the difference between what the consumer is willing to pay and what he or she actually pays. He was willing to pay 100 rupees, but he actually pays only 80 rupees, and this 20 rupees extra he was ready to pay to purchase this same quantity rather than going without it from the market, right? So this difference can be considered as this consumer surplus. So we will be discussing this concept with the help of a graph. Let the x-axis is having is implying the quantity, and the y-axis we will be implying price as well as marginal utility. Let DD will be the demand curve. As we all know, the demand curve slopes downwards, right? So let the DD will be the demand curve. As we all know, as quantity increases from O to D, when the quantity increases, what will happen? The marginal utility level will be, the successive marginal utility level will be decreasing. Now why? Because law of diminishing marginal utility applies. That therefore, as successive quantity we are consuming, the marginal utility level will be decreasing. And suppose we are purchasing the mango at price P1. Okay, let this be, this will be P1. So at P1 price, how much quantity we can purchase? This demand curve will be, let this point will be R. So this demand curve will decide what quantity we will be purchasing at P1 price, right? So at P1 price we are going to purchase Q1 quantity. So O Q1 quantity we will be purchasing at O P1 price, right? So what is the total expenditure? As we all know, the unit price into number of commodities, or how much commodities that we have purchased, the product of this price as well as the quantity will be giving us the total expenditure, right? So the total expenditure, how much we are how much incurred to purchase OQ1 quantity will be given by the price into quantity, right? So the total expenditure comes like OQ1 into OP1, right? Or simply we can tell like it is the area of this rectangle, right? OQ1 R P1. So the area of the small rectangle gives the actual expenditure that is incurred to get 1 kg of mango at price P1, right? But what happens here? The consumer was willing to pay much more. Let this be the 80, and previously we have discussed 80 rupees was he actually paying, but he was ready to pay 100 rupees, right? So OD price he was able to pay for purchasing the same amount of mango, right? So therefore what he was actually ready to pay, that will include this rectangle as well as this above triangle, right? That is the total expenditure he was ready to pay was like OQ1 RD, right? So this was actually he was willing to pay, but he only incurred this area of the this rectangle, that is OQ1 RP1, that is OQ1 R P1. So the difference can be considered as consumer surplus, right? So therefore the area below this demand curve, that is DRQ1O minus the area of this rectangle gives this triangle, right? This area of this triangle can be considered as what? Consumer surplus. That is the area of DRP1. This DRP1 can be considered as the consumer surplus, right? So the total including this rectangle, this area of the triangle plus rectangle denotes the total expenditure that he was willing to pay, but he had to pay only this much amount, right? That is OQ1 RP1, and the extra amount, that is the area of this triangle, can be considered as the consumer surplus here though. So this can be considered as consumer surplus. So it is nothing but the difference of what what the consumer willing to pay and what the consumer actually pays. I hope the concept is clear here. So there are certain assumptions in consumer surplus also, as we have discussed for law of diminishing marginal utility as well as law of equal marginal utility. First one is marginal utility of money for the consumer is considered as same. This was the basic assumption of cardinal approach, cardinal utility approach, right? So marginal utility of money is considered throughout the consumption process, even though the marginal utility of money increases when the stock of money decreases with us. That is the realistic assumption. But in the case of analyzing the consumer behavior based on this cardinal approach, we can tell like marginal utility of money is constant. The second one is commodity does not have any substitutes here. the only commodity, commodity will be totally unrelated with any other commodities. And the third one is there won't be any difference of income, taste, preference and fashion during the process of this consumption. And the fourth one is each commodity is considered independent of others, that is there are no substitutes, there are no complements, the consumer will be considered as totally independent in order to define consumer surplus here. So we are going to calculate some of the consumer surplus of this the same unit of mango. So before while we were discussing the law of diminishing marginal utility, as we have already seen that in successive consumption of a same commodity which is having similar taste and remaining all other things are constant, what will happen? While we are consuming the successive unit of commodities, our marginal utility will be declining, right? Here the marginal utility is also depicted as this price willing to pay, right? What is marginal utility? It is the additional satisfaction, or it is the price that is willing to pay for that particular commodity, right? So when I am consuming the first unit of mango, that is this is my first mango, when I am consuming the first mango, my total utility is 20 as well as my marginal utility is also 20. But the market price, remember that the mango, for each mango the market is price only charging 5 rupees. So for each mangoes, how much mangoes I consume, it doesn't care. For each mango the market price is just 5 rupees only, right? So I was ready to purchase this one mango for 20 rupees, but the market price was just 5 rupees. So what is my consumer surplus? It is just 15, right? And as law of diminishing marginal utility implies, more the stock I am having, less will be my marginal utility. So the additional marginal satisfaction I am getting will be lower and lower in the successive commodities, which implies that the price I will be willing to pay for additional quantities will be reducing, because my additional satisfaction is also reducing. But we already discussed that the total utility will be increasing, that is 20 to 35, then to 45, then to 50. Therefore in the the difference between this price willing to pay and the actual market price will be giving the consumer surplus. So in the first unit of mango, the consumer surplus is 20 minus 5, that is 15. But in the second unit, 15 was the ability of the consumer to pay, but the market price was 5. Therefore 15 minus 5, that is 10, is the 10 rupees is the consumer surplus. And in the third unit, what happens? 10 minus 5, that is 5 rupees is my consumer surplus. And in the fourth unit, what happens? Market price becomes equal to the additional satisfaction I am getting, right? Therefore there is no consumer surplus. So the price the marketer is asking me is nothing but the satisfaction I am getting from paying that 5 rupees. Therefore there is no consumer surplus, and according to the consumer surplus theory, the consumer will be stopping his consumption at this fourth unit of mango, because the consumer surplus is 0. That is the concept regarding this consumer surplus. Another important concept is like, what happens when the price increases or decreases to the consumer surplus? So we have earlier discussed that 80 rupees was the market price for the 1 kg of mango, and I was ready to pay 100 rupees, and my consumer surplus was 20 rupees, right? What if this price 80 rupees is increased to 90 rupees? My consumer surplus decreases to 10 rupees, right? Because the change 100 minus 9 becomes 10. Therefore what happens when the price increases? When price increases, consumer surplus decreases, right? Likewise, when price decreases, when this 80 rupees of mango, if I am getting 50 rupees in market and I was ready to pay 100 rupees, and my consumer surplus increases, right? Here it was 20 rupees, now my consumer surplus is 50 rupees. So when price decreases, consumer surplus increases. So there is an inverse relationship between price and consumer surplus, that is P inversely proportional to consumer surplus, we can say. Therefore there is an inverse relationship between price as well as the consumer surplus. So see the first case. In the first case, the price of the quantity commodity was OP, and OQ commodities we were purchasing, and this area of OQRP was the amount of the total expenditure I am actually paying in the market. But OQRD was the total expenditure I was willing to pay. Therefore the consumer surplus will be given by PRD. This we have already discussed in the previous slide. What happens if the price increases from OP to OX if it is increasing, what will happen to the consumer surplus? See, the area of the triangle decreases, right? Therefore, the consumer surplus is decreasing. So, graphically also we can arrive at this relation, that is price increase inversely proportional to consumer surplus. As price increases, this area of triangle decreases, and therefore the consumer surplus decreases. And if price decreases, the consumer surplus increases. That is the relationship between the price as well as consumer surpluses. There are some difficulties in measuring the consumer surplus. What are they? First thing is, a complete list of demand prices is not available. When I am going to the market, if I am getting the whole data, the whole realistic data of the prices only, I will be able to measure accurately the consumer surplus. Otherwise, I won't be able to measure the consumer surplus, right? And second thing, for necessaries of life and conventional necessaries, the consumer surplus is immeasurable and indefinite, right? For example, we know that rice is one of the basic commodity that we need for our survival, right? Because hunger is our basic need. So in order to overcome that, rice is our one of the basic necessaries of life. We have classified our wants into necessaries, comforts and luxuries. Necessaries of life and conventional necessaries are unavoidable from our life, right? So for them, whatever the price may be, even if the price increases, even if the price decreases, we don't care about it, right? Because it is so essential to sustain our life. Therefore, for necessaries of life and conventional necessaries, the demand curve will be totally inelastic. Therefore, the measuring of the consumer surplus will be really difficult for this kind of quantities, that is necessaries of life and necessaries, conventional necessaries. The third one is variation in the income of the consumers. As we have already told that the assumption of the consumer surplus is like income of the consumer is not changing. But if our income is increasing, I could allot more of my income to purchase these quantities, right? Therefore, the consumer surplus may vary, and the measuring of the consumer surplus will be difficult. And the fourth one is, as we have already discussed in the previous series, that is law of diminishing marginal utility and equimarginal utility. The limitations was like marginal utility of money actually changes, in fact, because if I am having 10,000 rupees in the initial period, this 10,000 to 5,000 rupees I will be paying like anything. But when I am getting lesser and lesser money in my pocket, what I will be doing, I will be very cautiously allocating my money, right? Because my marginal utility of the last unit of money will be actually increasing. But in cardinal utility approach, or in the case of consumer surplus, we are assuming that marginal utility of money is constant. So as it changes in the realistic situation, it is really difficult to measure the consumer surplus. And the fifth one is substitutability of the commodities. So here there was an assumption that the commodities shouldn't be having any substitutes, but in practical situation there are many commodities. So when price increases and price decreases, we will be substituting this commodity over another commodity, right? So the substitutability of the commodity is also becoming a difficulty in measuring the consumer surplus. What are the importance of the consumer surplus? First one is conjunctural importance. What is conjunctural importance? Remember, if in an economy all the consumers are enjoying higher consumer surplus, what actually it implies? Whether it is implying economy is getting better off or economy is getting worse off. Higher consumer surplus enjoying by this economy. In fact, this consumer surplus, the equilibrium price is decided by demand and supply, right? So the mismatch of the demand and supply will be assigning some random prices, so that if consumer surplus is really high for each and every commodities, it is to be mentioned that the law of this demand curve and supply curve, as well as the price determination, is inefficient in the economy, right? So because of this inefficiency, we will tell like the consumers will be worse off. Even if they are having higher consumer surplus, in total the consumers will be worse off. So that is the conjunctural importance. Second thing is, it is useful to the monopolist. For those products which is having higher consumer surplus, if the that product is produced by a monopolist in the economy, if there are higher consumer surplus for the same product, the monopolist can increase the price, right? Or he can decrease the consumer surplus by charging more price, right? So therefore it will be advantageous to the monopolist, or he will be having higher profit as it is having higher consumer surplus among the consumers. Third one is it helps in the public finance and taxation. How it helps in the public finance and taxation? Suppose a commodity is having higher consumer surplus, that is, the price he is willing to pay is much higher than the price he is actually pays, right? So therefore the government can impose some tax on those products, right? Therefore the government will be getting some remuneration, because anyway for 100 rupees the consumer is willing to pay, but he has to pay only 80 rupees. And if this 20 rupees extra the government is imposing tax on this one, so it will become 80 plus 20, that is 100 rupees, that was already affordable by the consumer. So therefore this 20 rupee will be going to the government, right? So it can be used for some other welfare activities by the government. So it helps in the public finance and taxation. And fourth one is it helps to measure the benefits from the international trade. Suppose there are two countries, A and B, and if A is exporting a product P to B, and if the population of this B or the country B is enjoying consumer surplus for these products, what it implies, A can export much more of the products to B, right? So that's how we can tell, like, help to measure the benefits from the international trade. So coming to another important concept, that is consumer surplus and producer surplus. So consumer surplus is nothing but the difference between the consumer who is willing to pay as well as what he actually pays. What is producer surplus? Producer surplus can be defined as the difference between the market price and minimum variable cost per unit of output. So producer surplus is, it is the difference between the market price and minimum variable cost. So we will be explaining this consumer surplus and producer surplus with the help of a graph. So as we all know, let this be the quantity and this be the price. So let this be the demand curve. As we all know, the demand curve slopes downwards, and this be the supply curve. So this is the demand curve and this is the supply curve, and the intersection of the demand and supply happens here at X, and this point we will be arriving at the optimum price and optimum quantity. This is P1 and this is Q1. So as we have already discussed, what is the consumer surplus? This is the consumer surplus, right? If the OP2 was the OP2 price the consumer was willing to pay, but actually he only actually pays OP1 price. So therefore this can be considered as this consumer surplus. So therefore there's a possibility to ask some statement questions, that is consumer surplus, where the consumer surplus belongs to the area below the demand curve and area above the equilibrium price line, right? Equilibrium price line comes this consumer surplus. So area below the demand curve, that is P2x, and the what is the optimum price? P1x, right? So therefore the area below the demand curve and the area above the equilibrium price line will be given by the consumer surplus. Where comes this producer surplus? Just opposite, right? This will be the producer surplus. Therefore this can be considered as producer surplus, and producer surplus is area below the equilibrium price line and area above the supply line, right? Because this is the supply line. So the area below the equilibrium price line, area above the supply line constitute the producer surplus, and economic surplus can be considered as consumer surplus plus producer surplus can be given by economic surplus. So this is the basic idea. So graphically we have turned this table into a graphical representation here. As we have already discussed, the quantity demanded decreases and the quantity supplied increases, and here see at the quantity 10, that is OQ1. So OQ1 is 10 units, 10 units of quantity, and what is the price? This is 8. So equilibrium price is 8, but the consumer was ready to purchase this one at 10 rupees. Therefore additional 2 rupees of consumer surplus he is getting. So this is how we are defining this consumer surplus as well as this producer surplus. Coming to another important concepts in consumer behavior analysis, that is indifference curve, and it falls under ordinary approach, as we have already discussed. Ordinal approach. So what is an indifference curve? As we have already discussed, the marginal utility could be measured in terms of utility or in terms of money in cardinal approach, but in ordinal approach we are just assigning different combinations, preferences over different combinations. Suppose this is x and y, we can tell like this is dairy milk, x is dairy milk and y is Milky Bar, right? So there are different combinations of Milky Bar and Dairy Milk, right? So in combination A, what happens? I am buying 1 Milky Bar and 20 Dairy Milk, and in the B combination, I am increasing my Dairy Milk quantity 1 to 2, and in order to afford another one additional unit of dairy milk, I am sacrificing 5 units of Milky Bar, right, in order to make my budget in a constant way, so that as one quantity increases, other quantity will be decreased, because my budget has to be allocated among these two quantities. And there are different combinations, right? A is there, B is there, C is there, D is there, and infinite combinations we can take in different combinations of x and y. And among these combinations, which combination I would be preferring more? If I am a kind of dairy milk person, what I will be choosing? F I will be choosing, right? Maximum dairy milk and minimum Milky Bar. If I am more of a Milky Bar person, I will be choosing this A combination, right? Because I need more Milky Bar and just one dairy milk. So it is based on this preferences only we are defining this indifference curve analysis. So indifference curve analysis, or we will be denoting it as IDC. Indifference curve is based on the assumption of ordinal utility, and it explains the behavior of the consumer in terms of his preferences or rankings for different combinations of goods. So how the consumer will be preferring all these combinations. An indifference curve is derived from an indifference schedule, and this can be considered as an indifference schedule, right? Because the consumer is indifferent at each combinations here. All these combinations, the consumer is indifferent to x and y. So this is an indifference curve, and this constitute of the x commodity and this constitute of the y commodity, and along the indifference curve what will happen? The utility level obtained from each of the combinations will be same. So along the indifference curve, the satisfaction level that we are obtaining is same. So here also in different, even though we are considering different combination, in the first combination what happened? Only one dairy milk and 20 Milky Bar we were having, but the utility level that we are having in A is equal to B also. Even if the combination changes, but the utility level in each of the combination will be allocated in such a way that the utility level we are deriving is constant. So along the indifference curve, the utility level obtained from each of the combinations, we will be having same utility level. So what will happen in the topmost here? See here, only a little of x we can have, but here maximum of y we are getting. In order to increase my unit of x to here, what I have to do? I have to sacrifice y here, right? So in order to have this x1 quantity of x, I have to sacrifice my preference to y, and this is y1. Therefore that's why the indifference curve is convexly sloping to downwards, because more of a quantity of x I have to sacrifice more of y. But in each combinations, we can see infinite combinations are happening in each of the points in the indifference curve, right? So in each of the combination, we have to remember that the utility level is same, or the utility level which is getting by the consumer is same. So which are the properties of indifference curve? First one is it is convex to origin, right? It is convex to origin. And the second one is it is negatively sloped. Why it is negatively sloped? Because to get more of x1, I have to sacrifice more of y, right? So more I am having x, less of y. That's why it is negatively sloped. And indifference curves are non-intersecting. What if in a higher utility level? This will be another utility. This one is indifference curve 1, and if this one is indifference curve 2, and a higher indifference curve implies that higher utility. So here if I am having some utility, we can, if the combination is here, we can, if the combination is in P, we can assuredly tell that the utility level in P will be really higher than that of Q, right? So indifference curve will not be intersecting each other. It will be one above the other, but it will not be intersecting each other at all, because if they are intersecting, like this is I1 and this is I2, we have already discussed that a higher indifference curve will be higher satisfaction, right? So here I2 was top, so therefore the satisfaction level here will be really higher than that of I1. But after this point, what happened? I1 comes over, and here this utility level changes, right? So we are assuming that in a higher utility, higher indifference curve, utility level will be higher, and if the consumer if the indifference curve intersects, means that assumption will be break off, so therefore breaks off. So therefore indifference curve cannot be intersecting each other, and IDC, which is lies right to the another, denotes higher utility, that we have already seen. It lies right to the previous one, right? Or it lies higher to the previous indifference curve. So higher the indifference curve, higher the utility. Therefore if this is I3, we can tell that the satisfaction level or the utility level of I3 is greater than I2 is greater than I1. And when we are denoting a single indifference curve, it can be considered as indifference curve, and when more indifference curve are shown like this, I1, I2, I3, in order to show different combinations of the two products at various utility levels, we can consider this as indifference map. So this can be considered as an indifference map. So next comes the important concept, that is budget line. What is a budget line? As we have already discussed, we are allotting, suppose I am having 500 rupees, so I could allocate this 500 rupees entirely for this good Y if needed, right? So the point will be here. Or else I could allocate this 500 rupees in entirely for good X and not to Y, so therefore the point will be here. So here let this be D and this will be E. So if I am preferring in a point of D, I will be telling that my entire 500 rupees is allocated here in D, but if I am going for E, then my entire 500 rupees is allocated for good X, right? So in between there are different combination of X and Y, right? So if I could allocate 400 rupees for good X and 100 rupees for good Y. So otherwise there are another combinations like 300 200, right? 300 versus 200, or 250 versus 250. That is equally I am allocating. So infinite combinations I could allocate this 500 rupees for this good X and good Y, right? So those combinations where my budget is allocated among these two products gives my budget line. So budget line is nothing but it shows all the possible combinations of goods that could be purchased with a given amount of income. We are considering 500 rupees as our given amount of income. Here what happens, changes in the prices of the goods or money income shifts the budget line. What happens if 500 rupees is increased to 1000 rupees? So I could purchase more of good X and good Y, right? So my income line or the budget line will be shifting to upwards, right? Because I could purchase more of good Y and good X as my income increases. What if my income level decreases? My budget line is shifting going to downwards, right? Because I could purchase only less of good Y and good X because my income level is really less. Similarly, if the price of the commodity increases and decreases also, we could the budget line shifts, because suppose if the price of the good Y is increasing, what happens if the price of the good Y is increasing? The quantity of the good Y I could afford is really less, right? So therefore there is a pivotal shift. The E is X, the price of the good X is the similar, but price of the good Y is increasing, therefore only lesser quantity only I could consume, therefore this budget line will be shifting to here, right? So since price of the good X is not increased, we could purchase this much X itself, e quantity of X itself we could purchase, but as price of the good Y increases, only here this much quantity we cannot afford because the price has already increased, therefore this budget line shifts like this. Similarly in the case of X also, this shifting of this budget line occurs. So shifting of the budget line is because of this income level as well as the prices of the commodity. I hope you got the concept. So how we can derive at the consumer's equilibrium? So in consumer's equilibrium, this budget line and indifference curve analysis will be showing this consumer's equilibrium. So this is my budget line, and there are different indifference curves. So let this be first indifference curve, let this be second indifference curve, and let this be third indifference curve. What happens in the budget line? See, D is my budget line, and I could allocate, I could prefer any combination of good X and Y along the budget line or below the area of this DD curve, right? So I could prefer here, I could prefer here, I could prefer here, but not over the budget, above this budget line, right? Because suppose I am having 500 rupees of income, and if I am preferring here means it is 600 rupees of expense I have to incur, but I cannot afford that because my level is 500 rupees, and those combinations of good X and Y over this DD curve or the budget line only I could afford if I am spending 500 as whole. So there are three indifference curves here. So let this be I1, let this be I2, and let this be I3. So what happens, this is my first point A. Here see what happens here, the budget line, I am sticking onto the budget line itself, but what happens here in B, as we have already discussed, the utility level that is enjoying in a higher indifference curve will be higher than that of the previous one, right? So the marginal utility that I am feeling in I2 will be greater than I1, right? So I could opt combination of good X and Y here, but in the combination of B, what happens, the satisfaction level of I2 is greater than I1, because in A the indifference curve is lower than that of I2, that is the utility level is here less than here. So therefore we could go for any point that is tangent to the indifference curve. So when the budget line is tangent to the indifference curve, that can be considered as consumer equilibrium. So when the budget line is tangent to the indifference curve, that point can be considered as the consumer equilibrium, because none of the points in I3 comes under the budget line because it is not affordable, but there are many points here, here and all, and even AB, even in the C also the budget line, the preference is coming, more of X and less of Y is coming in the combination of C, but there also it comes under I1 indifference curve only, but in B much more utility is derived. So this combination of B, or OX1 and OY1 quantity of this bundle will be preferred over all those points. So the consumer equilibrium will be where the budget line is tangent to the indifference curve, or we can tell that we could express like the slope of the budget line is nothing but the price ratio, and the slope of the indifference curve is nothing but the slope of the budget indifference curve is like delta y divided by delta x, and the budget line is px by py. So when delta y by delta x is equal to px by py, that is the slope of indifference curve, which is equal to slope of budget line, there comes the consumer equilibrium. So this is how the consumer equilibrium is derived in the ordinal utility of approach. Ordinal utility approach. So I hope the concept is clear. So we are stopping here. As we have already discussed, if you are having any queries regarding the previous class, or if you are having any interesting topics that has to be dealt with Agriadic platform, feel free to comment down the video. Thanks a lot for the huge responses for the previous videos. As we have already discussed, you could avail for the free mock test bundle, which is available in the Telegram group as well as Agriadic website, which is provided in the beginning of the video, and join for the Telegram group also for the regular updates of this videos and all. And if you are really interested, you can go for the complete mock test bundle for the several subjects which is provided by Agriadic platform. So that's all about today. Thank you.